Ew, you ever been in a conversation with someone? Me neither, but do you ever see posts online where people are starting to hate on something and then that hate video goes viral so that thing will get an overwhelming amount of hate in a very short amount of time because no one is a free thinker? No? Well, I'm gonna tell you about it anyways. Let's say, for example, a YouTuber is getting rightfully canceled for something, and then there's people living in the black molds in the walls that randomly say, oh my god, we're finally hating on this guy? Ugh, finally. I've always hated him after he started parading around as a woman. I called it from the beginning. I'm so glad we're all on the same page now. Oh! Actually, we hate them because they made rape jokes. It's actually common sense to know that it's fine to be trans. But oh yeah, you're super quirky and different for excusing rape jokes from your buddies but not being trans, apparently. I brought it up in my last video as a joke, but do you guys remember that comic Boyfriends? Hear me out, hear me out, hear me out, hear me out. So for those who don't know, Boyfriends is a webtoon about 4 LGBTQ plus characters with 4 different high school label stereotypes. There's jock, nerd, goth, and prep. Goth isn't goth, he's more emo-based in his actual character. Prep isn't very preppy considering the only prep trait he has is that he's rich. Nerd isn't very nerdy, he's just an incel horny anime kid. Because I remember the kids like that in my high school who used to say I looked like an anime girl, and they weren't very smart. They couldn't even place their finger on which anime girl or why I specifically looked like an anime girl. But whatever. Maybe jock is like the closest one to fitting his stereotype, but in the comic, the best sport he's good at is dancing, which isn't a really stereotypical high school jock sport. Apparently, the only time the creator uses their real names is the smut version of the comic. Yes, this comic, this very cutesy pastel comic with these boys that look like they're 15, has a smut version. Isn't that interesting? The original comic is a slice of life with the 4 getting together in the very first 5 episodes or something, with a lot of corny and horny humor, and extremely cringe, but I think that's done on purpose. For some reason, I got super into hating on boyfriends. My Pinterest is stacked with boyfriend slander. Why? Because I think people being over the top dramatic is hilarious. But then, I started noticing something. Instead of the regular hate I usually see, which is the comic is super cringe and nerd smells, I'd be seeing stuff like, I don't like goth, so I purposely call her a girl. Or I hate boyfriends because goth is a harmful trans stereotype. Harmful stereotype? You mean a trans guy wearing a binder in one episode and a trans pin during a Pride Month episode is stereotypical now? Oh yeah, right. Because trans men wearing binders is obviously pushing their dangerous liberal agenda, like trans men getting top surgery? Ugh, give me a break. This comic is boring, has too many sex jokes, nerd is a pro shipper, and all the characters are flat. The labels that the characters have are on the wrong category, and is an embarrassment to be associated with the LGBTQ plus community. But really? You're gonna be transphobic to a gay webtoon? There are so much more fun reasons to hate on it. That's along the lines of oh yeah, fuck this webtoon. Why did they make Asian characters when they should have just been white? And yeah, these characters are all canonically Asian, by the way. But that's not why you should hate it. Hate it because it's cringe, the humor is not great, or because you simply don't like the writing. Not because you've taken some aspect of a character that's perfectly normal and turned it into some weird valid reason to hate on it. Make it make sense. I'm not gonna lie, there's very little poly representation in popular media, or at least the media I've been exposed to. So when I first read Boyfriends, it was actually my first introduction to polyamory, which means usually having a romantic or intimate relationship with more than one person at a time, with everybody's consent involved, of course. Then there's polygamy, which involves being married to multiple people. I didn't realize it existed outside of religious context until I came across Demon Slayer's Tengen and his 3 wives. People actually say his relationship is a healthy representation of polyamory, in contrast to Boyfriends, which feels more like an educated fantasy. In Boyfriends, the poly dynamic comes off as heavily fetishized, as if the creator couldn't decide which dynamic he wanted to choose for his characters, so instead he chose all of them and made his characters be okay with that. I know that people think that nerd is a self-insert for the artist, but I think the artist was trying to make fun of this archetype, but it didn't really come off that way. Throughout the comic, the events that unfold just align to whatever nerd wants, despite him seemingly fetishizing his boyfriend, since he doesn't really seem to like his boyfriends for who they are, but instead of what they can offer him. The comic doesn't really explore the real dynamics, effort, and emotional work involved in poly relationships. Instead, it's all conflict-free, giving off this carefree, no-strings-attached vibe, which might appeal to readers, especially in this genre, but it misses the reality of what poly relationships actually require. It is possible to explore the concepts of jealousy, boundary misunderstandings, and poly setups without it being so exhibition-y, with them just sitting at a table. Because there's also poly relationships in this comic where Jock's sister, who's also known as jock, and her girlfriend's nerd, prep, and goth. Very creative, isn't it? But their dynamic isn't very different from the boys, which gives off the impression that there's only one type of poly relationship. It's kind of like someone made polyamory into a dating simulator where each person is just there to tick off a specific box, rather than showing it as the multi-layered communication-heavy relationship style that it is in reality. They do have communication in the comic, but these again seem to be more like setups for them to have a big deal kiss afterwards. That's what makes boyfriends feel so surface level, in my opinion. It treats polyams almost like a fantasy or a dating aesthetic rather than an actual relationship structure. I know it's a slice of life, not categorized as a drama or romance or anything, but for someone who loves slice of life comics, it's incredibly vanilla despite all the sex jokes. In real life, poly relationships rely on a ton of open communication, trust, and individual connection with each partner, something that the comic skips over entirely. Instead, it's all about the aesthetic of having multiple partners without ever showing the work it takes to keep everyone happy and secure. The way Boyfriend simplifies both the relationships with the boys and girls gives the impression that polyamory is just about collecting partners with no effort involved, which ultimately reduces it to something less meaningful and honestly a little shallow. Real criticism would focus on how Boyfriends misses the complexity of poly relationships by making them seem effortless or one-dimensional, not on the fact that the characters are poly in the first place, because too many people jump straight to, they're poly, that's so weird, as if polyam itself is a problem rather than how it's portrayed. Criticizing the characters just for being poly is lazy and dismissive. It completely overlooks that polyam, when done right, is built on real commitment and emotional honesty, just like any healthy relationship. There's plenty to critique about Boyfriends without dismissing the characters for being LGBTQ+, because the artist seems to be taking in these critiques considering that he later goes into depth with all of these characters, their backgrounds, but their dynamics with each other seem to be the same from the beginning, but we can't all have a win, I guess. I don't know why, but when it comes to anything involved with the LGBTQ+, people act like it's the absolute worst thing about someone is their gender identity or sexuality, as if that overshadows everything else about them. It's wild how quickly folks latch on someone's gender or pronouns as a reason to pile on hate, even when there are far more serious issues to criticize. It's like being part of the LGBTQ+ community automatically makes someone a target, and any chance to demonize them is fair game, no matter how irrelevant it is to the real issue. Like, I remember when I graduated high school, I recently met up with an old classmate from my drama class. A mutual classmate was brought up in conversation, and I mentioned that I didn't like them. So then they brought up that they didn't like the person either. And I personally love bonding with people over mutual hatred, so I brought up the essay allegations against them because I feel like that's a valid reason to dislike them. And then they proceeded to say, yeah, and they changed their pronouns like every week, like kid and self? What a fucking weirdo. I mean, sure, neo-pronouns can be confusing, but really? You think their neo-pronouns are on par with actual assaults? Really good to know where your priorities lie, oh my god. This warped sense of outrage happens all the time where people somehow sees an LGBTQ+ identity as a bigger offense than legitimate harmful behavior. Take for instance the influencer Fuzz99, who's known for making loud but sometimes informative LGBTQ+ videos that, yeah, might give you an inconceivable amount of secondhand embarrassment, but people go beyond just thinking that the content is annoying. People actually accuse Fuzz99 of being a groomer, founded on the evidence of parents getting upset because their kids happen to watch his videos. Let's be real, tons of kids stumble onto random videos every day, from prank channels to family vlogs, yet somehow Fuzz99 gets labeled as a predator because he discusses LGBTQ+ topics. People act like he's out here specifically targeting kids when in reality he's just creating content in his own little corner of the internet. If his videos aren't your thing or you don't want your kids to see it, block him, scroll past, or even mute the account. It's the job of the parents to monitor what their kids are watching. If you as a child guardian are uncomfortable with what they watch, change the video. It's wild to me that people will clutch their pearls about Fuzz99 teaching LGBTQ+ terminology, but are totally fine with letting kids watch hypersexualized pranks, family channels exploiting their children, or the Paul brothers setting a horrible example of behavior. How is it that kids seeing a creator talk about LGBTQ+ identities is somehow worse than them watching influencers faking kidnappings or promoting toxic relationships? Homophobic parents don't seem as half as concerned about their kids learning about fake drama and clickbait as they are about them learning learning that being gay is okay. Like, okay, cool, destroy public property for likes, but don't you dare mention a pride flag. Just because someone has an energetic video style does not mean he's a danger to kids. What's even worse is that these unfounded accusations are coming from people within the LGBTQ+ community. You think that LGBTQ+ people, out of all people, would understand how damaging these baseless claims can be, especially considering how these same allegations have been used against gay and trans people for decades. Historically, LGBTQ+ folks were often labeled as dangerous influences to justify exclusion or worse, and now some members of the community are reinforcing those same harmful narratives. It's like these people have forgotten that being cringe or annoying online is not the same as being harmful. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of horrible people who put a bad name on LGBTQ+ individuals. But what we're not gonna do is keep pulling out the groomer accusations just because someone's content isn't everyone's cup of tea. Do you remember when people kept talking about the sketch allegations? The allegations were him being outed as gay. It's honestly so depressing how quickly people turn on each other over this. It's so tiring that people see queer representation or self-expression as indoctrination. Gay couples kissing in public, oh, they're indoctrinating the youth. Adults seeking gender-affirming care, they're cutting off children's private body parts. Just because someone's LGBTQ+ doesn't mean they're trying to corrupt society. This fear-driven response doesn't come from a concern for kids or society, it's just thinly veiled intolerance. If you're going to criticize something, at least have it be about their character or actions, not their identity that does not harm you in the absolute slightest. Alright, that's it. Laters.